Let's get started. I see a few friendly faces in the room. Well, you all look friendly, but I see people that I know and that I've met before. We're going to talk today about the neuroscience of change. I've been doing a deep dive into this topic, and it's the subject of my new book that's coming out at the end of February. A little bit about me. I run my own consulting agency. I have a doctorate in education, leadership, and organizations, and a master's in media. I have been in the academic world, and I've also been in the corporate world. I started at lynda.com, which has now become LinkedIn Learning, as a member, and then an author. I have 8 courses in the library, and then I was the chief learning officer until I left 6 months ago to start my own practice. I have 8 courses in the library. My recent one that just came out is Organizational Learning and Development. It has some of these ideas in it, as does Leading Change, but the book is the most recent publication. I also wrote Wired to Grow. That's in the bookstore. That was my talk last year. So if you were here last year, that's on the neuroscience of learning. So for all learning design, how we learn, that's all the neuroscience on that. And I've written some articles in the ATD magazine, and we also have a book on creating a culture of learning. If you turn in your business card, I can send you a couple of those things as just little attachments for you. And I'm a tinkerer. I tinkered with my deck up until 15 minutes ago. So if you want the most recent version of the deck, I can send you that as well. And then my new book, Wired to Resist, is coming out at the end of February. So let's talk about change in today's organizations. How many of you feel overwhelmed by change going on? Fast and furious, never seems to stop. So we can count on technology to drive it, right? There's a new version of everything coming out every 30 seconds, it seems like. And we can harness that technology to help us also deal with change. So I'm going to be talking about that in this talk as well. Some things we know about change. It is still currently true that 50 to 70% of change initiatives fail. And if you think about how much money is spent, that's billions of dollars globally every year is lost on change. We know that 29% of change initiatives launch without the proper support to help them succeed. Of people who have change training, 22% of them say it's ineffective, it's not helping. And we also know that 68% of leaders get the message about change. That trickles down to 53% of the managers really know what's going on, and it gets down to 40% of the employees. So we also have a communication flow issue that happens in organizations where change and the reasons behind it and what it's achieving is not getting down. And that's why employees can be so resistant. They're being asked to do stuff and not really understanding why. What does change look like? You know, this list of things is no stranger to you. You can have a new job, a new role, be part of a new team. You might get a new manager or leader, have colleagues shift that you're working with. Your organization might be working on new technology or rolling out a new process. You could be investing in a new product or service for your consumers. You could be turning your attention to a new market or customer. You might be operating a new country or a new culture. You might even have a brand new company or future. Little story, the reason I started researching the neuroscience of change is that I was working at lynda.com, and I went into work one morning, and it was announced that LinkedIn had bought our company. And I was thrown into the biggest of all changes because literally within 30 days, everything about my work environment changed. Who I reported to, who my colleagues were, how I logged into my email, where I found food, how the bathrooms worked, everything. And so I quickly realized that everything I'd been teaching about change was not enough to explain what me and my colleagues were going through. And so that's when I started my own deep dive into what's the neuroscience behind it. I really believe a lot of what happens in our organizations is about our biology, because we're human and there's no real getting around that. And so I found some really interesting things that I'm going to share with you today. But I can tell you, having a new company in future overnight is really quite stunning. And a lot of these changes then can drive personal changes too, right? You might be moving into a new home, establishing a new school for your kids, having to find a new community. Like, where's the best Chinese food, right? That might be a change you have to deal with. So how do we assess the impact of change? Well, first I want to introduce that there's 2 different things going on. The first is the change itself. The change is the structural stuff. We're going to reorg this department, right? It's very factual. It's very unemotional. There's a plan, probably a very detailed plan that goes on for pages or slide decks, and you execute it. But the real stuff is happening in the transition, how the humans respond to that change, right? It's the emotional stuff. It's the reactivity. It's a process. And you just have to adjust to it. It's not something you execute. And depending on what kind of shape the humans in your organization are in, this can go smoothly or it can become a hot mess very quickly. We'll get into why. Now, one of the models you're probably familiar with seeing is the change curve. It's tried and true. I've taught it for many years. And it says that time runs along the bottom and productivity run along the vertical axis. And a group is operating at their normal level of productivity and morale, whatever that is. And when you introduce change, it creates this curve. And the first stage of that, people have feelings of shock and denial. Then they go into anger and fear. Real fun group of people to hang out with. And then at the bottom of the curve, things turn around. They either quit or they get on board for the change, right? So if they make it to phase 3, they start to accept the change and explore it, and finally they're committed to it, and the team returns to the normal level. One of the things I discovered about the change curve, though, is it doesn't really apply to all changes, right? Not every change looks the same. So some of the things that differentiate change is how long the acclimation takes. If it's something that you can get used to in a couple weeks, you're probably not going to go through all that. Where if it's something that takes a long time, it's going to have more emotional stuff on it. There's also how much of disruption it creates. You know, changing the faucet might not change your life too much. Having an acquisition, big disruption. Also, how many total number of changes are you holding at one time? If any of you have had a new baby or moved into a new house while doing change at work, you start to realize you have a bandwidth, right? And you can max out pretty quickly. And how fast are those changes coming? Do you have time to breathe and recover before you're hit with the next one? So all of these factor in, and yet we don't really have a good model for tracking that in our workplaces. We kind of just think all change is the same, and we're not really looking at them as a holistic experience. So one of the things that I created was this change matrix. Was if we think about time to acclimation and amount of disruption, we can start to color code change. If it's quick to get used to and it doesn't really cause a lot of work, it's going to be in the green zone. Might just be a blip, might not even create a reaction. If it takes a lot of time to get used to, but it's not that disruptive, it's going to be in the yellow zone. If it's pretty disruptive, but it's over quickly, orange zone. And if it's high and high, it's going to be the red zone. So we can now start to tease out what are the different kinds of changes that we're asking people to go through. So let's look at some examples. And I do this with teams. I'll have them map their change on this matrix. But we can take some typical things that might change in a company. And, and if they change the faucet, probably not a big deal. Moving your desk, I don't know. This would all be personal. So where you might place it might be different than where your neighbor would place it. But you can start to see that people can now start to differentiate how emotionally reactive this change is going to create for them. Not all change is the same. And so I was dreaming one day, and I was like, gosh, I wish I could mush these two things together. Like, give the change curve a little more flexibility. So I did. So if we have time running across the bottom and disruption and resistance running across the top, we now can look at current state as the beginning point, and the new normal, whatever that is the end point. And if we turn the curve upside down and think of it more as a mountain rather than a valley, everyone I've talked to said, yes, that feels more like change. Like I feel like I have to climb up something and get over the hump rather than climb out of the bottom. The reason why we have so many emotions, and again, I'm going to apply the Kubler-Ross feelings to this model, is you're still going to have shock, fear, and denial at the beginning, followed by anxiety, stress, and anger, frustration, confusion, and depression. And and all of this happens because the neuroscience of it, and I'll get into the brain structures in a few minutes, but we really focus on the past when change is announced and what we might lose. That's biologically wired into it. It's part of our survival mechanism, but all humans have to go through this, even if it's awesome. I won the lottery. But what if we become like those people who ruin their lives when they ruin the lottery? What if we aren't happy with all that money? People do this. I just got a promotion. Awesome. But what if? So it's very natural and normal, and that's what drives the negative emotions. When you get to the peak of the change, resignation happens. And resignation actually has 3 forms. One is you quit. Screw this, I'm out of here. I don't want to go through this change. This isn't fun. I quit my job. Or the leaders who designed the change go, oh my God, we were not expecting all this drama. Never mind, we're rolling back the change. When really they needed to just hang in there a little bit. The drama was normal. People just needed to get over the hump. And then the third type of resignation is people go, okay, I guess this is happening. I better get on board. And when that happens, psychologically, they turn toward the future and they start to look at potential gains. That changes the whole emotional tone of the experience. And then you start to have things like acceptance, curiosity, still a little skepticism. You can get into hope, creativity, and engagement. And finally, a little bit of impatience even, like, come on, I want this to get in place, and excitement. Then you're back to the new state, whatever that state is. Now, what's not yet added here is and let me show you one more thing. We've got these levers that make this dialable, because not all change is going to look that big, right? The faucet shouldn't look like this. We should not have anxiety and hope over a faucet. Well, unless you're in a faucet-making company, and then that could have a whole new meaning for you. So I also wanted to create dialable levers so that you have a sense of being able to predict. And then we can add the colors. So if it's high on time, long time, and high on disruption and resistance, it's going to be red, this long, intense climb. It's going to take people a while to get there. There's going to be a lot of negative emotions, and then they're going to turn the corner. If we bring that dial down, it takes less time, but it's still disruptive. You're going to have this quick hike up a steep hill. It's going to require people to sprint, but because it's over quickly, they'll move through it a little faster. Make sense? If we then bring it down to low disruption but extend the time, the third type of journey you can have is the long, steady trek. You're just plugging along. This could be one of those year-long rollouts. You're revising the policies, or you're getting ready for a regulation. You know what you're doing. It's part of your daily work. It's not too disruptive, but you're going to have to chip away at it over a long period of time. And then finally, if we get to the smallest change at all, the concern for past and future goes away, and you just get this pebble on the path. Just this little blip that might not even be worth noticing. Once we have all four types of this, we can now start to map what a team is going through, because you can give them one of the four journeys and start to label, what am I asking these people to do? So let's take a look at one team. And here's Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. And they're rebranding the product. It's a long, slow trek. It's going to take a year. They have a couple green things in the middle, right at the beginning. Then, during Q2 into Q3, you've got migrate to new software. It's going to be over fairly quickly, because typically software conversions, the work happens behind the scenes, and then for the employees, it happens overnight. But then, as all of you know from doing software conversions, there's a lot of drama on the backside as people get used to it. But it's over fairly quickly. Then you could have a merger, for example, starting where you're starting a long thing that's going to take a year, and you might start another long trek, revising policies. Well, when you start to lay them on top of each other, this is what employees actually experience, right? This is what a team could be going through. You start to go, we've put a lot on this team. And then you can start to identify the danger zones, particularly if you then add on to it. I like to add rhythm of business on the top, so we know when performance reviews, we know when stock vesting happens, when summer vacations happen, when the engagement survey happens. What do you think about the engagement survey in the middle of a hike? What do you think your results are going to be, right? They're going to tank your engagement survey. So you can start to realize that this team is holding a long, steady trek, a quick hike up a steep hill, and that little green bump might not feel so little now. If you change the faucet on this team now, they're going to freak out because they're already a little overwhelmed. And you've got another zone here where you've got several changes hitting at the same time. When I have leaders map this, they immediately have aha moments. And they start to realize, oh, if we just shift something by a few weeks, we can make this better. Or we can combine a couple changes, we can be more thoughtful. So let me talk about the faucet, because during the merger that I went through at LinkedIn, I was reassigned to the Bay Area. So I was commuting every week up to the Bay Area from Santa Barbara. I had a whole new team, huge campus. Where I found food was different. How you put in the tech ticket is different. Everything's different. Well, I went to use the bathroom my first day, and this is the faucet. It's a very eco-friendly company. And I washed my hands. You know, the water came out when I stuck my hands under there, and then I could not find paper towels anywhere. And I was like, okay, I guess this is a really eco-friendly company. So I dried my hands on my pants, went back to work. Did that the whole first day. Second day came in, and I finally found there was a paper towel dispenser on the farthest end of the bathroom around the corner. Okay, great. On the third day, I don't know what I did differently. I stuck my hands under there. The other side is a dryer. It went off, and I levitated 3 feet. Scared the hell out of me. Took me 3 days to learn how to use the damn faucet, okay? So for me, honestly, the faucet became the thing too much, you know? And I was going back to my hotel room exhausted. By about 2 o'clock every day, I literally couldn't take in new information. I'm a smart person and I wasn't tracking things. That first 6 weeks, I was literally fall down on the bed exhausted by 5 o'clock. In fact, one night I came back to the hotel and the National Spelling Bee was on. I watched it for 4 hours. So let me tell you, people, change fatigue is real, okay? There's scientific reasons for it. And again, I was having a great aha moment with it. We know that the symptoms of change fatigue are disengagement, exhaustion, absenteeism, confusion. This leads to poor judgment and poor decision making. Conflict, people start to kind of get with each other, they get a little annoyed with each other, and cynicism. You see any of that in your organization at all? I oftentimes think that what we're measuring with engagement is change fatigue. And if we're not doing change well, it shows up as people starting to lose faith with kind of knowing what they're contributing to and how good they feel about the company. I think these things are tightly intertwined. We know that from a study that Ketchum did, 47% of senior leaders believe that change fatigue is a problem in their organization. It's not going away, so we got to get better at knowing how to deal with it. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to play with these tools, pair up or get in triads, but I'd like for you to think on your past 12 months. What does your change map look like? And if you've got a sheet of paper in front of you, draw it out. Which ones were the big humps? Which one were the little humps? When were you carrying the most changes? How did that impact you? So 5 minutes on the clock, it'll ding at the end, but just chat through kind of thinking about the 4 types of journeys and how they mapped out for you. Okay, thank you. There's always going to be a ding, and I'll count you down. So already this tool should be able to help you and other leaders in your organization start to map and predict change a little bit, you know, and also see where they're going to hit. One of the things I also like to do is to do teams that interact a lot with each other and map both of them, because you can start to see where their stress points happen when they might be under a lot of stress from change, and then you're asking them to engage nicely and play nice with others. And sometimes that doesn't go well, right? When people are under stress, it's harder for them to do that. So let's talk about the brain science of change. I want to get into some of the neuroscience of it, because I think when we understand our bodies, we can use them better. And you happen to be in charge of the care and feeding of lots of bodies in your organization. So what's the neuroscience of change? It's the central nervous system. That's our brain and our spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system is all the other nerves that come off of that. How they play a key role in how we respond to and move through change. We're wired to resist. It's part of our biology, and I'm going to give you 4 reasons why it happens. But there's no getting around it. And everyone always says, well, Britt, what about the people who love change? There's some people who are super flexible and like to drive change, but they're still going to have some biology around it. There's just going to be a percentage of what somebody else might experience, but it's still happening. And you'll see that as we talk through it. If you want to remember kind of a shortcut to how humans work, just remember that we're wired to survive first, then belong second, and then we can get to becoming our best self. And in organizations, we really want people operating at that 3rd level, right? Being their best selves, rising to their potential, doing their best work. But if they're stressed out about belonging, that gets messed up a lot with change. Or if they feel like their survival is threatened, change software in a sales team, and you will see a whole group of people who thinks their survival is threatened, right? Because it's tied to paychecks. So now modern day survival is paycheck and performance review, because that's how we survive in the modern world. We don't build our own huts anymore. We go rent one or buy one. So change in the brain. There's 4 brain structures I'm going to take you through. The first one has to do with fear. It's the amygdala. Then the entorhinal cortex is our internal GPS system. Then our basal ganglia creates habits. It's how we build habits. And then our habenula drives failure, our experience of failure. And all 4 of these really play a role in change. So the first one, fear. The amygdala is the little orange thing on our diagram, and it's responsible for the fight, flight, freeze response. If you've ever had a car swerve into your lane, you have felt that instant rush of adrenaline, and it's a really wonderful thing, right? It helps our bodies get ready for the attack, whatever it is, and survive it. The problem with today's modern society is that it can be set off in a staff meeting, right? if we perceive things that we think are threatening to our sense of belonging, our sense of safety, our sense of well-being, our ability to achieve, it can go off. And I think that the amygdala and this response, it's called the amygdala hijack, is responsible for most HR issues that we deal with. So if you haven't yet seen my TED Talk on that, watch it. I think it's the number one thing we all need to know is how to handle our amygdala hijack. But what's really interesting about the amygdala is it is wired, so every major sensory nerve directly feeds to the amygdala. So your optical nerve touches the amygdala, your olfactory nerve touches the amygdala. So if we smelled fire smoke right now, it would do its job. It would be like something's wrong, and it would send off its alarm system. Well, it perceives all change as potential danger. That's its job. It just is constantly scanning. Anything changing, anything changing, anything changing, and if it sees change, auga, warning system. And the reason for this is our survival of our species. We were more likely to survive if we noticed that the grass looked different today than it did yesterday, right? And we were more likely to survive if we assumed that difference was not a family of fluffy bunnies, all right, but something that could eat us. And in fact, we are the descendants of people who had the most hyperactive amygdala systems. If you want to see a funny movie that depicts all this, The Croods, the animated movie with Nicolas Cage as the father, it's really funny. So that's what's happening with the amygdala, and oftentimes we don't think about the change implications. So when we announce a change, the employee immediately goes to, what could I lose in this? You just gave me a new boss, what could I lose? You're reorging my team, what could I lose? You're changing the performance system, what could I lose? And the amygdala gets fired off. And so that's why we see those initial negative emotions of shock, denial, fear, anxiety. It's because of the amygdala. The second brain structure drives our GPS for how we navigate physical space. It's called the entorhinal cortex. And it's the purple. It's actually part of the hippocampus. And if you were here last year, you know I talked about the hippocampus as part of our learning structure. Inside the hippocampus is this sphere of cells. And it's literally a sphere. And what they have discovered is it maps our physical space. So when you're walking around this convention hall, for example, the first few times you're navigating, your entorhinal cortex is building a physical map. And the Mosers, they won a Nobel Prize for this research. They hooked rats up and hooked up the entorhinal cortex, and then they had the cells lighting up on the computer screen, and you could literally see a map of the space being drawn. And the rat would run around the space and build the map, and you could see the dots even lighting up, the cells lighting up in the direction they were moving as fast as they were moving. And it's a 3D sphere. Now, if they put the rat in a new space, they would see the brain construct a new map, and if they put the rat in a previous space, the old map would come up. And then the brain would only mark changes. Like now there's a new door here that wasn't there before. It even marks boundaries, so when the rat hits a wall. So we make physical maps. And you do this as you move into a new neighborhood. Right now, we're all figuring out how to get around this convention center. Our brain can do it, but it takes a little bit of energy. But once it's done, that map will be there for us to use. If you think about a lot of change takes away people's maps, right? Like when I all of a sudden was navigating the Mountain View campus in the Bay Area, everything I knew about where food was, where bathrooms were, all of it was different. My brain built new maps, but it took time, okay? What's really interesting is, so the Mosers have studied this for physical space. There's another group of scientists that found that it also maps social space. So that when you come into a new group of people, you create mental maps of those relationships. And what your brain is scanning for is hierarchy, power, power and hierarchy, and also affinity, how connected or close or safe you feel with that person. So we do that naturally too. We walk into a room and we read people. And we get the lay of the land. And again, when we initiate change, what happens? People's maps disappear. They have to build new ones. So if they knew their team and who they could go to and who they felt were their colleagues before, they might have to rewrite those maps. So these are things that can create more reactivity and change. The third brain structure has to do with our habits. So most of the things that we do in the world become habits if we do them enough times. The basal ganglia is the brain structure that does this. And basically what the basal ganglia does is when we're learning something new, you can see a lot of energy in the prefrontal cortex lighting up. And they measure that using glucose burn. So they can see how much energy the brain is taking. Well, when you do something over and over again, like driving, like using your smartphone, over time, the basal ganglia says, oh, this doesn't make sense to use this much energy. I'm going to turn it into a low energy package and run it in the background. So you can actually measure it on the MRI. You can see the glucose burn drop off. It happens. Well, time or number, it's usually 40 to 50 repetitions. So if you think about me and up at LinkedIn, it was about 6 weeks before I stopped feeling so exhausted. So you can actually kind of predict when it's going to happen. It takes repeated tasks and it turns them into habits, and then they run on autopilot. Well, if you think about a lot of change, what does it do? It wipes away the habits that they had, right? The well-grooved neural pathways that were comfortable and easy that they didn't have to think about, and now all of a sudden there's something that takes time and energy. This is what explains all the drama with the software migration. I can't log on to my email the way I know how. This is taking 10 minutes instead of 30 seconds. Frustration, frustration. The good news is the basal ganglia helps us build new habits, and one of the things I argue is that we all need to be in the business of habit design. There's no training we should build that isn't ultimately thinking about what's the habit we want to put into place, and more importantly, helping people get to the right number of repetitions. Because 20 repetitions builds the neural pathway, 40 to 50 is when it gets into a habit and it starts to run on a low energy package, and 66, they can actually measure the microns of those neurons getting thicker. So it's like anything, the more you run a neural pathway, the stronger it's going to get. What do we do with most change? We tell people about the change, we announce the change, we give them the deadline for the change, we pull the trigger on the change, and then we let them go through the repetitions on their own. Use the training room, have them log in 10 times. Use the training room to practice that behavior enough times that you get that neural pathway started. And then finally, and I think this one is the most fascinating actually, is the brain structure that has to do with failure. It's called the habenula, and it sits near the hypothalamus, or the thalamus, sorry. And it uses chemical guardrails to prevent us from repeating past failures. So what's really interesting is our brain naturally produces dopamine and serotonin. That's kind of the reward chemical that we get that make us feel good. And the brain naturally produces it. And what the habenula does is if you do something wrong, it restricts the drip. So when it's active, it's cutting back on the serotonin and dopamine you get, making you feel bad. And how it worked is back in our hunter-gatherer days, if we were going down this trail and not finding food, and we were going down that trail and finding food, the next day when we came back, we wouldn't feel like going down the trail that didn't give us food. We'd want to go to this one. So it creates actually a level of kind of negative feeling, even depression around behaviors you don't want to repeat. And it even can constrict your moto, what's the word? Just lost the word. Anyway, your ability to move. So if you've ever found yourself saying, I just can't get up to do it, it actually could be your habenula repressing your muscles so that you cannot get up to do it. And a lot of this research is showing up in learned helplessness, where if you have a team that's constantly struggling and you try to bring changes, but they keep behaving the same way, what can happen is that they've gotten into a basal ganglia habenula combo where there's failure, and now they've got a habit for repeating that failure, and they can't quite break the loop of it, if that makes sense. What's really interesting about change, though, is that it's lots of opportunities to fail, right? You're going to mess up the software the first few times. You're going to mess up the things the first few times you do it. And if we turn those into opportunities to fail, but we don't counterbalance them with some kind of reward, the habenula says, don't do that again. And I think what we're seeing in our employees is it's not just that again, it's change. Oh no, more change has come. I feel bad about change in general, where it's really a specific change. So how we counterbalance this is start to add lots of positive rewards for going through change until the person makes the shift. All right, so if we think about these four structures, if they were talking, the amygdala would say, I'm freaking out. The basal ganglia would say, I don't know what to do. The entorhinal cortex would say, I'm lost. And the habenula would say, I can't screw up. Well, if all four of these are activated, you've got a group of people who are pretty stressed about change, right? And it's going to take some artful management to move them through. Are your leaders ready? Do they know how to manage these kinds of emotions? All right, so I want to give you 5 minutes to kind of think through that. Think about some changes you've gone through. Not all of them apply. So if you weren't changing physical space or the network of a team, the GPS one won't really be a factor. But think about a few changes you've gone through or some that are rolling out in your organization. What should you be on the lookout for? How might you want to tune in to how the brain's going to react? Let's come back together. Thank you for that lively discussion. So I realized as I was looking at this that if we understand how the brain works, we can start to anticipate kind of what people's motivation for change might be, right? And if we think about change as kind of a Johari window, did people choose the change or not? You're going to feel differently about a change you chose, right? If you apply for a job and you get that job, even though it's going to represent disruption, you're on board for it. You wanted it. Where if you're all of a sudden just moved into a new role and you didn't ask for it, you're going to have more resistance, right? And then, so there's choice. Did you choose it and did you want it? So those are two different things. And we can actually map these. If you choose it and you want it, you chose to apply for the job, you got it, you want it, you're going to celebrate the win, right? And you're going to run toward it. You're going to have high enthusiasm and motivation for this change, even if it's hard. If you want it but didn't choose it, this is how I felt about LinkedIn. I didn't choose it, but I was such a fan of the company that when it was announced, I was like, yes, this is such an awesome opportunity. It just landed in my lap. So I'm walking with purpose. I'm embracing this opportunity that just was handed to me. You can also have, I didn't choose it and I don't want it, right? And this, you're really going to feel like it's an imposition. You're going to dig in your heels. You're going to have a lot of those negative feelings showing up. And then finally there, and people are like, really? You can have something you don't want but you choose? And yes, maybe you don't want to be moved to a new team, but in your mind, you accept it and you decide to get on board with it, but you might be enduring it, right? So I chose these four kind of figures. You're going to trudge along, you're going to make it work, but you're not loving it, but you're not actively resisting it either. Make sense? So we can now use this information to think about the changes in our organizations. And you can kind of say, oh, the team is really excited about rebranding the product. They're going to be running toward that. There's a lot of enthusiasm. But that software migration, they don't really want it. They're probably going to trudge along because we're going to make them. But managing that team is different for those two changes. You have to have a little more emotional intelligence to get trudgers on board than you do runners. Make sense? If we think about a merger, you could have a group that's half, willing to get on board with it and half really distressed about it. How are you going to manage that team? So by adding this level of detail to this, it can help us start to think about, are our managers ready? Because change lives in the manager level. All the leaders can have the best ideas in the world, but the day-to-day experience of it happens with how the managers drive it with the employees. So are you going to take a brand new manager and put them over a team of trudgers on a quick hike up a steep hill? How do you think that's going to end? Right? We know how this is going to end. So you either better have some training to help that person get on board and some support around them, or you might need to have another more experienced manager co-lead or lead that change. But we kind of just throw change and we're like, okay, they'll all handle it. No. All right. And then, trudging toward revising policies. I don't know. Well, I know a couple people who actually love revising policies, but they're few and far between. And then this also works for personal change too. So you can also do your own map. This is something that I was working on last year, and I had to move my mom into assisted living. I did not want to do it. She didn't want to do it. Both of us were resisting it. So by just thinking about it that way, I was able to be much more thoughtful and slow and spend more time preparing both of us for the process. And I was much more ready for the drama that we both experienced in the doing of it than if I hadn't thought about it. And then I remodeled my kitchen. I was running toward that. I was so excited. I had a 1960s horrible, horrible kitchen. Of course, by the end of the year, I was huddled in a fetal position under the counter. So it looks beautiful now, but boy, that was a journey, let me tell you. So this is something that my husband and I do too. Like once a quarter, we kind of sit down and we look at what's happening at our work and what's happening at home, and we start to realize when we're carrying a lot of change, and we'll be like, okay, we better dial back and not entertain so much this quarter, or we better dial up our meditation and yoga practice because we're going to need it. So it can also help people be more thoughtful about helping themselves through change. And I have an entire chapter in my book because we all have change put on us. I don't care even if you're the CEO, something happens. So there's a whole chapter on how you thrive through change when it was put on you. So let's talk about strategies for success. All of these can be addressed with technology and some of the systems you have in place, and some of them you'll want to tinker with some things. And I'm going to have some specific recommendations at the end. The first is, let's work with the brain. The human biology is not going to change. So to ignore the amygdala, to ignore the failure stuff, only makes a mess that you have to clean up later. So if you're more thoughtful about working with the brain, you're going to design better change from the beginning. The second thing is we really need to help our leaders. This is part of my leadership management training for leaders, is I give them the brain science. I explain the social psychology of it, because if they have that, they are much more on board for helping their team move through it. Oftentimes what leaders and managers do is they take the resistance they're seeing as a reflection on themselves. And that can harm their egos. It can harm how they feel about it. When I'm like, no, they're being human. They're not doing anything to be resistant to you. They're just being human. How do you help them move through it? It can give them a whole new orientation to how to lead. And so I really believe that part of leadership training is helping them understand what the journey looks like and giving them the tools to do it well. That includes emotional intelligence. Change is emotionally messy. And this is one of the things I tell leaders all the time. Even when you do it perfectly, if you are a rock star, there is still drama. So don't expect the measure of your success to be no drama. The measure of your success is, did you shorten the time and did you lessen the height of the mountain? Those two things you can influence, but you can't take the drama away. So emotional intelligence training works. You can teach people to be emotionally intelligent. If you have not invested in that yet, you should. Here's something interesting that came out of the neuroscience research. It's recommended that when you're working with a team going through change, instead of focusing on goals, you shift to phases of problem solving. And here's why. Goals work. Goals are awesome for our day-to-day jobs. Set the goals, check them off. But in change, our goal list can become a very rigid thing that we try to hang on to. Okay, I'm going to hit the goals. I'm going to hit the milestones. And yet, show of hands, how many change initiatives have actually rolled out on time, hitting all the milestones when you were supposed to? Nobody. Okay. So what happens is if we shift the attention to, hey, we've got a problem-solving phase. In this problem-solving phase, we're working on X, Y, and Z. It turns on the hunter-seeker part of our brain that's looking for a solution. And then it gets a reward feeling for finding the solution rather than a failure feeling of not hitting the goal on time. So think about change as a series of problem-solving phases rather than phases of goals. Get an air traffic controller in your company to track change. Nobody's doing this. We need this job title. Someone needs to be sitting there and looking that facilities is rolling out a change at the same time HR is rolling out a change, at the same time tech is rolling out a change, and this poor marketing team is going to get hit with 3 major changes plus have a new leader all in the same quarter. No one's looking at that. A lot of your tech systems can talk to each other. We're already mapping some of this stuff in our tech systems, but someone needs to have the bigger picture and start paying attention to when are these pitch points coming. And that makes a difference also to be kind of measure the net effect of change. Let's say the marketing team just lost a beloved leader, right? They're getting a new manager, they lost a beloved leader, you're throwing the new copier at them, you're rearranging their desks. Really? Do they need to get the phone system too? Or can they be the last team to get the new phone system, right? Can we do something to help this team thrive and not be so overwhelmed by stress? Because if you ignore it, what's going to happen is your best people are going to quit. You're going to lose your best people. It's always the best ones that quit, right? Your mediocre ones and your poor ones don't run out the door. It's the best ones that leave. Celebrate milestones and successes. How many of you gone through a change where you go through it and by the end, all that happens is you write up the report? The last meeting happens, you do a little post-mortem, you write up the report. There's no frickin' cupcakes. Where are the cupcakes, right? You need to have rewards, and they need to happen through the milestones and the successes. Now, instead of being the boss that kind of puts that on the team, this can be a great thing that bonds the team too, is have them think about what should we do to celebrate? What should we do to mark our accomplishments? How can we shine the light on what's working? How do we call out each other when we're helping each other? If you turn that into a team experience, it reorients them to the change as something that they're going through together and helping each other thrive through together. Changes the whole conversation. But we really miss this a lot, and what we do is we basically have change be a series of, I'm freaking out, we missed the milestone, so I failed. Okay, we're struggling with this, so we failed again. Okay, it's done, and we're on to the next change. Well, the habenula is going to be like, forget it. I don't want to do that again. So we got to counterbalance the habenula with lots of reward pieces. Leverage the power of learning. There's lots of ways you can help build up the basal ganglia habits. You can also use learning as onboarding to change. We onboard people to the company. We should onboard people to change and have a thoughtful process for that. You can use learning to even give people maps, physical maps of the place. You can use virtual reality to give people tours of the places that they're going to be working in. There's all kinds of technology you can use to leverage the power of learning, but what you want is that brain to have enough repetitions that it can turn that into a low energy package. Until it gets to 50 or 60, there's gonna be feelings of frustration. So you can now also predict when the drama's gonna die down. If it's something that they do daily, in about 40 work days, it'll calm down. If they do it multiple times a day, you're down to weeks, right? If it's something they do once a month, you know, they're never gonna get enough repetitions for it to become comfortable. Oh wait, I'm aiming there when I should be aiming here, and there we go. Enhance adaptability. There are things we can do to make the human body more receptive to change and help people be more flexible. So one is self-care. Change is not unlike the flu. When the flu season comes around, we all do a few things. We get more sleep, we wash our hands more, we eat a few more veggies. There's things that we do to kind of inoculate ourselves against the stress. We also get the flu shot, right? The flu shot for stress is mindfulness. I'm not kidding. It is literally so medically powerful that if you've not yet invested in mindfulness training, it's worth every penny. What happens when people meditate, and I'm talking 10 minutes, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, is resilience grows and the amygdala physically shrinks. It actually gets smaller and less reactive. And there's a couple researchers that are doing a lot of amazing work on this. The one I love to follow is Richard Davidson. He's out of the University of Wisconsin. He puts Tibetan monks on MRI machines. He puts the average citizen on MRI machines. And after a one-time meditation of 10 minutes, the brain is permanently changed. Permanently. If you get into a regular practice, it just gets better and better and better. And in fact, regular meditators, you can put them through these stress experiences, and they not only don't feel anxiety as the stress is coming, they stay nice and calm. When the stress happens, they bounce back really quickly and get back to their calm state, and their peak is not as high as people who don't meditate. So if you have not yet tried it, I encourage you to. One of my favorite products is Desk Yogi. It's something you can buy for your company, and it turns your every laptop into a mindfulness station. And they've got all kinds of other wellness programs on there as well. And then the last thing is just continue to use technology. So Desk Yogi is something I recommend. Practice is another company I recommend. It uses the power of video training to help people get those repetitions. So they have to upload a video of themselves doing the task, and then we know that typically people upload 3 or 4 versions of themselves, so they're getting a certain number of practice and just getting the video right, and then there's a chance for people to coach them, and they can also see an expert doing it well, and seeing it done well helps the brain know what to do. LinkedIn Learning, of course, has lots of fantastic courses on there that help. Immersion, Cubic, and Silverthread are all companies that do virtual reality kind of things. It's amazing how much you can trick the brain into having a real experience by having a virtual one, and so that helps you get there. Amplifier and Area 9 are companies that do adaptive learning. So some of your learning where Bob and Sally are very different in terms of their skill sets. They don't need to be paced the same way. The learning actually responds to them and moves as fast as they're learning so that they're not forced to go through a learning that's slower than they are, if that makes sense. And then finally, your HRIS or your LMS might have some features that can help drive some of these things as you're working on them. So let me give you 5 more minutes to just talk about those. What are a few of those that you could maybe leverage in the next few months for some change that's happening in your organization? And when we come back, I'll have a couple more things to share and we'll wrap up. I'm gonna make this 4 minutes just to keep us on time. If you want to learn more, this presentation is, I've turned it into a book, and that'll be out by the end of February. And my other book, Wired to Grow, is in the ATD bookstore today, and I'm doing a book signing at 2, if any of you. That's on the neuroscience of learning and learning design. And then there's some other great, oh, thank you. There's some other great courses on LinkedIn Learning. So leading with emotional intelligence, leading change, embracing change, design thinking, and mindfulness are all courses that are available to you. And if you stop by the LinkedIn Learning booth, you can learn more. I have a couple minutes for questions, and then I'm going to share with you my favorite quote about learning. So questions? Yes?
How do you feel about your change with Microsoft taking over?
Well, you know, it's funny. I had made a choice to launch into my full-time consulting practice, and my last day was Friday. This is how much you don't know anything. My last day was Friday. Monday, the acquisition was announced. I have to say I laughed all day long, because I just, it was one of those things where I love Microsoft and I love the products, but it was just one of those things where I had just survived, and it would have been just another huge red curve, and I wasn't ready for it, because I was still in the fetal position from my kitchen remodel, so it was a crazy year for us. Other questions? Yes? Here and then here.
When you talked about problem solving versus goals, one of the things that we looked at is instead of problem solving, it's using the terminology solution creation.
Yes.
It's a little more positive. Has that been your experience?
Solution creation rather than problem solving. You know, anything that helps the brain turn toward the future is good. The only thing is, if someone's really out of sync with the emotional place of their people, it falls on deaf ears, right? So if everyone's like, let's solutioneer, and everyone's like, I think I'm going to lose my job, it won't land right. So you have to be in the right space. But absolutely, if we focus on the forward thinking, finding solutions, that's better for the brain.
Yeah, and for us, it's because we see a lot of the trudge, is that you get stuck in just talking about the problem.
Yep. Trudge. We all have felt that way. Yes, down here.
I have a question on your red, orange, yellow, green curves, right?
Yes.
If possible, we want to align them so we're not changing the horse when there's a major change going on, things like that. And then after that, you mentioned that there are the different profiles, right? The trudge along, the run toward it, the walk with purpose. Even after you've rearranged all of those curves, so you're minimizing the changes that are happening at one particular time, any tips for managing different personalities that you've got within the change, like the trudger?
Yeah, so if you think about it, if you've got people who are downright resistant or trudging, you've got to do a lot more of the why up front, because the brain has to understand, why am I going through this? You can do a lot about talking about the potential gains and spending a lot more time talking about the gains, and then you have to really over-invest in rewards and successes during the journey. And in the book, I have a lot of details around what managers need to be doing for each of the profiles. But if you think about it, the more resistant someone is, the more the leader can do a better job of helping them make that transition. It falls more to the leader to have the emotional intelligence to help them do it, because, you know, when you're in that state, it's really hard to be your best self, right? Your employees are doing their best, but they're pretty stressed out. And so this is where enabling and empowering them with the right kind of leadership makes all the difference in the world. So I'm a big believer in management training. I'm a big believer in give your best tools to your frontline managers. This is not something you hoard. Like, give out management training like it's candy to all your managers as soon as you can, because the better skills they have, the better that team will be. And, you know, I mean, we've all worked in organizations where everyone knows there's a problem and they just keep letting it go. Shame on us. If you know a manager is just killing a team, move them out of there, fix the problem, get them the right support or coaching. But if you just let it keep going, you're just going to have more and more resignations and disengagement, right? One last question? Anyone? No? Okay, if you'd like the updated deck and a couple of the free goodies, turn in your business card either on the back table or hand it to me. My cards are up here, and thank you. I'm talking again on Friday morning, whole other topic. Would love to see you there.